This is 5th grade Social Studies Week 25. Independence and Revolution, the Military. This is part 2 of the text reading. We're going to start on the inside top left-hand corner where it says Military Encounters. No one is quite sure which side fired the first shot heard round the world on April 19th, 1775. After the fateful battles of Lexington and Concord, both sides knew they couldn't back down. The war had begun. There were many battles in the American Revolutionary War. The following were the major turning points for the outcome of the war. Battle of Bunker Hill. On June 16, 1776, the Americans entered the Charleston Peninsula and occupied Bunker Hill and then moved to Breed's Hill. General Gage and his men decided to take the hills by force. The Patriots held off the first 2 waves of attack, then ran out of ammunition. The British sent the 3rd attack and took over the hill. Trenton and Princeton. On December 25, 1776, General Washington's men crossed the ice-packed Delaware River. They marched to Trenton and then surrounded and attacked the Hessian army. Many Hessians joined the Patriots rather than being taken prisoner. A few days later, Washington's army marched quietly into Princeton, a neighboring city. After a short fight against General Cornwallis, Princeton was also under Washington's control. All of the section for Trenton and Princeton needs to be highlighted. Victory at Saratoga. The British had planned to quickly defeat the colonists by cutting off New England from the southern colonies, but the British plan didn't work out. Washington's army moved north and met General Burgoyne's troops at Saratoga, New York. The Patriot forces surrounded the British and Burgoyne surrendered on October 17, 1777. This victory helped persuade the French to join the Patriot cause. Battle of Kings Mountain. On September 1780, the British Major Patrick Ferguson challenged the South Carolina Patriot militias to give up their weapons. The rebel patriots instead joined together to attack Ferguson's loyalists. Ferguson retreated, but the patriots caught up with him at Kings Mountain near the border of South Carolina. Ferguson was shot and killed. The loyalists surrendered to the patriots. This patriot victory made Cornwallis's army unable to invade North Carolina. He had to retreat farther back into South Carolina. Yorktown, the end is in sight. British General Cornwallis took his army to Yorktown, Virginia, 1781. He hoped to find fresh supplies and more soldiers, but it was too late. French ships had arrived to trap Cornwallis in Yorktown. Patriot soldiers in the French Navy surrounded his army. Cornwallis surrendered on October 19, 1781. His defeat meant that the entire British army was beaten. And that whole section at Yorktown, the end is in sight, needs to be highlighted. Next, we're going to go down to, right below that is the Hessians. One of the grievances of the Declaration of Independence was that King George III was transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to do his work. This refers to the German-speaking Hessians. Sometimes countries didn't have enough soldiers to make a full army. The British army was especially spread thin, with its large empire reaching all over the globe. Because of this, sometimes much smaller German-speaking countries offered their armies in exchange for payment. King George paid the small country of Hesse-Kassel to send their trained professional army, the Hessians, to fight for Great Britain in America. A mercenary is a professional soldier hired to serve in a foreign army. The Hessians were mercenaries. Hessians participated in every major battle of the war. Some of the Hessians started to side with the Americans and deserted the British Army as the war went on. Many chose to stay in America after the war was over. The American Revolutionary War ended the mercenary practice of Hessian soldiers. All of this section of the Hessians needs to be highlighted. Next, we are going to bottom on the inside, the Marquis de Lafayette. It's all the way to the bottom. The cause of the American Revolution and independence gained attention and admiration from around the world. A young nobleman from France named Gilbert de Montaigne, the Marquis de Lafayette, was inspired by the Patriots. He volunteered to come and fight with them. Lafayette grew up in a wealthy family with a long tradition of military service. He wanted to make a name for himself in this Revolutionary War. Defying the direct orders of the King Louis XVI of France, he crossed the Atlantic Ocean in 1777. He was determined to assist the rebellious Americans. Upon arrival in the new country, he became friends with many patriot leaders and statesmen. Although still a teenager who spoke little English and lacked any battle experience, Lafayette convinced the Continental Army to commission him as a major general on July 31, 1777. He refused to accept payment for his service in the army. He was daring and bold in battle, and those who fought under his leadership were very loyal to him. James Armistead, an enslaved man who joined to fight with the Patriots, so admired Lafayette after working closely with him that he took his last name. Lafayette joined Washington at Valley Forge and stayed in his command throughout the entire war. In 1779, Lafayette returned to France and to the court of King Louis XVI. The king listened to Lafayette, and this time he agreed with him about the American cause. The British and French had been rivals for centuries. The French king saw an opportunity to strengthen the opponent of Great Britain. He agreed to send his support to the Americans. The French alliance gave the Americans funding, supplies, and military support. Lafayette returned to America with the money, supplies, and troops the Continental Army so desperately needed. He led both American and French troops through several important battles, all the way through the siege of Yorktown. You are going to highlight a young nobleman from France named Gilbert de Montaigne, Marquis de Lafayette, was inspired by the Patriots. He volunteered to come and fight with them. Those sentences right there need to be highlighted. And then we're going to move on to the next section, the strengths and weaknesses of the British Army. This should be just to the left of the section about the Marquis de Lafayette. At the beginning of the Revolutionary War, the British were certain that they would win. They had more soldiers than the Americans did. Their soldiers were better trained, better equipped, and were even paid. The British also had experienced commanders to run the war. However, the British had many disadvantages. The British officers and soldiers knew little about the geography and climate. Many of the British officers didn't like each other and would not take each other's orders. Since they had to wait for months to receive orders from London, they could never agree on a plan. The British Army followed the rules of war in Europe. The weapons of the time defined how wars were fought. Muskets had very little accuracy over long distances. The soldiers had to be in long lines across the fields. They would fire a few times, and if the army was still standing, the soldiers would then charge and engage in hand-to-hand combat. The Americans sometimes fought in the European style of war, but they also used tactics they learned from the fighting against the Native American tribes. They weakened the British armies through small surprise attacks, destroyed British supplies, and targeted British officers. Without officers, British soldiers didn't know what to do. American soldiers would strike and then disappear again into the trees. The British Army had the best equipment and good training, but they met their match in the ragtag army fighting for liberty. This whole section needs to be highlighted. It looks like yours is different than the one online. So for right now, we're going to call this the end of part 2. You will have... There will be 2 questions. You will need to get us some notebook paper, and you will need to answer these questions on your notebook paper, then turn them in. The first question: describe how the British Army typically engaged in battle. And then number 2, what were the differences when compared to the British and how the Patriots engaged in battle? When you have both of those questions answered, you can turn that in. Thank you very much.